Ready to explore the cutting edge of digital infrastructure? I'm Carrie Charles, your host of Let's Get Digital. Join me as we dive into the ideas, technologies, and leaders transforming the way we connect, from wireless telecom to fiber networks, data centers, and beyond. Sponsored by Broadstaff in partnership with RCR Wireless News. Now, let's dive in and let's get digital. Thanks for joining me on Let's Get Digital. I'm glad you're here. I have today one of my dear friends, Mike Underdown. He is the founder and CEO of Crosstown Fiber. I am absolutely thrilled to have him on the show today. You're going to learn a lot. We've got some cool stories to tell, along with learning a little bit more about the industry and also about Crosstown Fiber. So Mike, thank you for being here finally.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad our schedules finally connected.
I know. You're so busy, but it's a good thing. So how'd you get into this industry, this amazing industry that we're all part of? And then tell the story also behind Crosstown Fiber.
Sure. Well, it was several decades ago when I started, unfortunately. I had several, I'll call entry-level jobs when I got out of college. The market wasn't very good in the late 80s, early 90s. And I eventually ended up at a company called Teleport Communications Group, TCG. It was arguably the first CLEC in the industry. I worked for Bob Annunziata, was the founder, and it was just an amazing experience for me to start in that space, learning from Howard Brunke, who really was the godfather of fiber as far as telecommunications go. There's probably many others, but he was a New York Tel engineer that kind of co-founded TCG with Bob Annunziata. As I look back now, I wish I could appreciate then how much I appreciate everything I learned when I was there. I imagine everybody says that. But, we were dropped into the deep end of the pool in an industry that was just starting out. And I started in a sales role, although I had a bit of a technical spin to myself. So I started to kind of move more into a technical capacity, and then eventually moved all the way over into the data center side, where I was not really data center, but the data services side, where back when there was a technology called ATM, asynchronous transfer mode, which nobody knows what it is anymore. It's not your cash machine, but that inevitably died. I was at TCG right up until AT&T acquired us in late 98. And that's when I realized that I didn't really fit well in the large corporate world. I needed a little more space and grace to do what I like to do. And so somewhere after, 6 or 9 months, I resigned from AT&T and went to work for Adelphia Business Solutions, which was a company owned by Adelphia, which, didn't have the greatest end to it, but again, learned a lot about network development, network deployment. I was a area executive for Adelphia in the Midwest and based out of Chicago, and where I really got to understand network construction, IRUs in particular. We weren't really doing IRUs, in the 90s. IRUs, irrevocable right of use agreements for network, really kind of kicked off, late 90s, but really into the early 2000s. And that contractual tool really is what's going on today in some way, shape, or form. But that's really why I sunk my teeth. Anecdotally, I'll tell you that when Adelphia filed for bankruptcy and everything crashed, I was personally crushed. I thought I had arrived at a company I wanted to work for. I worked for Jim Regas for a period of time directly and really enjoyed him as a human being. And as an executive, he was a great manager. And so when they filed for bankruptcy and everything kind of fell apart, I was crushed and I left the industry altogether and said, I've had it with telecom. It's horrible. I wanted to do the next thing I love, which was pizza.
Pizza!
Yeah, I met a gentleman by the name of Joe Semick, who was the co-founder of Tombstone Pizza up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, oddly enough. And I started a pizza business, and I was distributing frozen pizza for a period of time. And as much as I was angry at the telecom industry and how I was done with it in so many ways, shapes, and forms, I did not belong in food distribution. I spent a lot of time losing a lot of money. It didn't go well. I didn't belong there. I sold some pizzas to a hotel in Las Vegas, and was the end of it, where I sold 150,000 pizzas to this hotel, and I think I made $1,800.
Oh my God. Telecom needed you back.
Yes. So inevitably, after all that, I did, again, it kind of gave me the entrepreneurial bug, if you will, because I realized that I could stand on my own. So I was doing some consulting for Mylan Pushkar, who, through his group, CityNet out of West Virginia, had acquired quite a bit of the Adelphia assets. So I went in there as a consultant and started to, I don't know, I guess strategically dispose of different assets that they didn't need. Inevitably coming down to the last four markets, which were Dallas, Phoenix, Chicago, and Cincinnati. And I put together a few dollars and bought it from them and started the company Chicago Fiber Systems, which was kind of an homage to Metropolitan Fiber Systems, MFS, because the original name of MFS was Chicago Fiber Optic Systems. And I wanted that name, but unfortunately it was still an actual legal entity at the time. So I couldn't. So I named my company Chicago Fiber Systems and started building a fiber infrastructure company in Chicago in 2006 and 7. I was a part owner in a data center, 601 Polk Street, in this time. So from 2006 till I sold it in 2008, I had owned part of a data center and a fiber company. My idea was to be the annex for 350 Cermak, as well as 710 Lakeshore Drive, which is the Starlight, the education gateway in Chicago. And at that time, in 2006-ish, Joe Mambretti over there wasn't taking anything but optical level connections. I think it had to be at least an OC 12, if I remember right. And not everybody, a lot of companies didn't have that. So my idea was to build a company to house all the people who needed to connect to 710 or 350. And I would create the OC whatever over there, and they would be subtenants of mine. That never went, but I ended up having some success in a company called Synesis, made myself and my investors an offer that we couldn't pass up. And they only bought the fiber asset. Eventually, we sold 601 Polk Street to what is now TierPoint, who owns 601 Polk Street today. All that, jumping around, I, continued to do consulting. I formed a engineering and construction management firm because I really found that I needed to see what I was doing. It's one of those things where I wasn't getting the satisfaction out of spreadsheets and proposals. I was getting more satisfaction out of moving dirt and seeing manholes get put into place and that kind of stuff. And I still am that way. I get most of my thrill about how much we can get done in Chicagoland. Frankly, this time in my life where I was a partner in Comdesco Communication Design Company, we were a civil engineering and construction management firm. Did that for about 10 years. That was where I kind of really got the bulk of my experience in construction specifically. It was also the time that probably the most important thing in my life happened. In 2013, I was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and I had this company and I had all these employees, and here I am battling this disease, and I didn't know what I was going to do. But the one thing I knew I wasn't going to do was, I had too many people depending on me. So I was just like, well, just got to push through, just deal with what's in front of you and move on. In hindsight, I formed a lot of my principles and philosophies as a result of my time laying in a hospital bed, and how you learn not to deal with certain things. Anger doesn't get you anywhere. In fact, I found that some of my friends who I also were going through similar things at the same time, those who were angry about it and would, basically give the disease a personality and swear at it, they're the ones that passed. And I just never acknowledged it as a disease, and I just kept moving forward as deal with what's in front of me. We'll see what happens after that. Don't get caught up in the end. And inevitably that I formed that into my company philosophy, which I'll go into later. So, I really had a positive attitude about it. And I think that is in large part how I survived it and moved on. That and the Blackhawks won the Stanley Cup. So
that always helps.
Yeah, that helped me a lot then. And so after all that, I exited Comdesco and started doing a lot of consulting just around the country in different ways, shapes, and forms, from data center design, communication design experience, where what I was seeing at the time, a company called QTS in Chicago had built a data center, and they were about to lose their anchor tenant because they didn't have a communication design. I got brought in to lay it out, and we started to show them how, if they moved some of the infrastructure out away from the building, they could draw the carriers there instead of begging the carriers to come there. And by doing that, they immediately recovered that anchor tenant, and now the building's full, I don't know, 8 years later, and they're on to their expansion. I did the same for several other data center companies where effectively they kept missing out. They would think that the carriers were close, and the reality was there was nowhere for the carrier to intercept them. So you had to show them how the infrastructure needs to be laid out so that you can draw these companies in. If you don't have a tenant, the carriers aren't going to come. If you don't have the carriers, no tenant's going to go there because there's no connectivity. I mean, a data center that doesn't have fiber infrastructure is known as a warehouse. It's nothing. So you've got to have that interconnection to the ecosystem. So anyway, I did that for a while. And then in 2019, I was asked to consult on a project in Chicago where a company out of Texas had won an E-rate award for the Chicago Public Schools. And I was asked to be part of the team. And so I started. We inevitably formed a CLEC to build instead of partnering. And through that course, the company out of Texas is still part of Crosstown, the minority equity participants now. I had to brought money in to buy them out because it's clearly a very substantial capital burden to build in Chicago or any major metro, to be honest. Particularly cities in the East are very expensive to build. But between union labor and just the general age of the infrastructure can get expensive and challenging. So that's when we formed Crosstown Fiber. Again, I always have a little bit of a play on words. I was watching TV and a commercial came on for the Cubs versus the White Sox. It's the Crosstown Classic. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's so obvious. So Crosstown Fiber was born out of a commercial. and so
I love it. Mike, I want to thank you for sharing your story, your personal story. And, ever since I met you, you have just been such an inspiration on so many levels, but especially when it comes to, how you beat cancer. And I know you're an inspiration to so many people that know you. So thank you for sharing that. And, I can't wait to get in a little bit to, how you incorporate that into your company culture. Just give an outline of, who is Crosstown Fiber and what you do and who you serve.
So Crosstown Fiber is a fiber infrastructure company in Chicagoland. We provide high capacity fiber infrastructure. We're a subsurface utility. We only build underground. My entire network is 100% underground. Again, having built for a lot of people, aerial construction has its place, but it's not in data center interconnection. And in today's world, data center interconnection is arguably one of the most important things relative to the digital economy. Obviously power is becoming the focal point, but frankly, right behind it is the fiber connection. Because as I said, a data center that doesn't have connectivity to other data centers is a warehouse. It doesn't do anything. So that's where we expanded the Chicago public school network and went into the data center space, because I was building routes for these schools that no one had built before. No one was in these neighborhoods. That's why the project was born. So I had unique paths that no one else had. And again, going back to my previous experience when I was running Comdesco, was diversity is everything. And having unique routes that no one else has is the secret sauce, if you will. And at the time, I thought I was building enough duct. I had overbuilt the system significantly to the point where we have a choke point in our network that's about 12,096 fibers. I'm not sure, based on some of the numbers and things that I'm seeing in the market, the direction that that's enough. As much as I'm significantly dwarfing everybody else's infrastructure in a metro space, I'm not sure that even I have enough. So as we moved out into the suburbs, into Elk Grove and North Lake, we overbuilt that even more. So now we're, north of 20,000 fibers in that space. But again, we just want to make sure that no one ever says that we never get to say, hey, we got to overbuild that because we don't have enough glass. So we've kind of standardized on 864 cables. We don't pull anything less. I won't pull anything more either due to the splice case issues that can be done. And the bigger cables, I did some consulting work for a company out of Ashburn that was placing 6912 cables. And that's just too much fiber to deal with, in my opinion. It opens up a lot of opportunity for human error, which is generally most of the outages are caused by somebody, a person messing up.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's why we went with that architecture.
Well, good. So, we talked a little bit about some challenges that you've seen with your data center clients, and there's, something that's missing in the planning and design phase that really causes problems down the line. Can you touch on that a bit?
Sure. Again, not every data center is created equal. So some of them don't have this issue, but many of them do. Particularly the issue for a lot of the data center operators, not the actual hyperscaler itself, but the data center operators that are out there and or developers, when they're building a $200 or $300 million site, it's spending an extra $20 million on communication infrastructure is kind of in the noise. It doesn't really affect it that much. And that's their opportunity to push that infrastructure out and away, taking care of some of the jurisdictional issues and right-of-way issues that can come up, whether it's a waterway, a gas main. There's so many data centers by airports now. They forget about the fuel lines for the airport. Sometimes they'll build a data center right adjacent to a fuel line. I know of a data center where they built this thing, and the east side of the street is a high-pressure gas main that the utility owns the whole street. And then the southern barrier is the jet fuel for the airport. And when you do anything, they're all over you. If they feel the vibration, the pipes have vibration sensors on them. And then, these black vans show up. It's spooky. So not thinking about that. But while they were in construction of the building, they could have put communication infrastructure on other sides of the highway. They could have coordinated with the utility at that time to get their infrastructure on the other sides so that companies, fiber providers in particular, could tie in at that point, and then they leased the conduit back into the building. That was what we were doing back in the 90s with ePort, now 350 East Cermak. We pushed that infrastructure out as far away from the building as we could because there was so much challenges around the McCormick Place area. So you pushed it to the other side of the tollway because tollway rights were challenging and things of that nature, railroad stuff. It's always a pain. So whenever I see these companies try to do it after they built it, my experience is asking for $1 million after you've spent $100 million is way harder than adding $1 million while you're spending 100. Mm-hmm. And so it's that pre-planning and understanding where you sit in the ecosystem, not just in your plot, but actually how it interconnects to the rest of the system that you're going to participate in. And I know there's a lot of competition between the operators and things of that nature, but it's a frenemy situation where you're competing, but you have to interconnect with Digital Realty. You have to interconnect with Equinix. You can't just sit there. And now you're seeing, companies like Oracle and Microsoft collaborating on stuff. So everybody, even though they compete, they still have to come together as well. And, the more we understand that from an infrastructure standpoint and can pre-plan, I think we'll find that, one, the communities that we build in will treat us a little bit better because nobody likes having their streets cut 2-3 times. Do it once, do it right, and coordinate, which really comes from engineering and planning.
What is the impact of the data centers on the communities?
It's kind of complicated. I had a lot of friends at Microsoft and tried to help with some of the Microsoft community engagements where I learned some of the downside of it. The upside is around economic growth and job creation. The jobs that are created, although on the negative, there isn't a ton of them, but on the positive, they are high-paying, good jobs. On the economic growth, in Chicagoland, in the last, 15 years, there's been about $4 billion worth of data center construction in the Chicagoland area. There's probably another 4 or 5 billion coming that's planned at least. I heard a number where Digital Realty has contributed, over the years that they've been there, 20 years that they've been there, in excess of $3 billion to the economy. So it's good money. So, from the taxable and all that kind of stuff. As you look at like infrastructure, by building these data centers, particularly in communities that may be further out or may not have the same digital equity, if you will, these data centers could enhance connectivity and infrastructure out there. They're certainly going to upgrade the power grid in those communities as well. So the benefit of that power grid is there, all very positive. On the negative, depending upon architecture and design, I mean, historically, water usage was a big thing. Energy consumption still a big thing. And, let's face it, not every data center looks great either. So zoning and aesthetics are kind of a challenge, or can be for a lot of communities if they, have a little better look. So, there's a lot of different things that are there. And I know in Chicago, there's a new thing called a data residency, which is a mandate that a certain portion of the data that's there has to stay within the city limits. So, when they make these decisions to do stuff, it isn't immediately going to some other community for revenue. There's some of that is staying within the community itself. So it's just starting. We'll see how that goes. But I'm very excited. That was Alderman Villegas's drive. And I think I actually really do believe it's a great policy to be created, and maybe see more and more of it across the country.
Let's switch gears to your company culture. And I really would love to hear about how, your experience with cancer, helped you to create some of your values in your company.
Yeah, so I got a little philosophical when I was doing that stuff, and it was kind of fun for me as I started to think about things and what I was going to do. And it kind of stemmed from being a scientist. I should actually go back. One of the things is when you're laying there and you're trying to figure things out and you're trying to take calls and you're typing on your computer and there's nothing else to do, because a hospital is nothing but a series of naps. So at any given time, at any time of night, you're awake. So I kind of came up with this idea. Well, it's not my idea. I read about it. I was reading a lot of philosophy, and I got really heavy into Stoicism and Taoism. But one of the things that struck me is doing right because it's right has become the cornerstone of what I try to do. And what that means is no matter what benefit to you, do the right thing because it's the right thing. And when you sit back and you take a moment and you analyze, sometimes even when you do something good for someone, you did it because you yourself benefited from it. And it wasn't because it was the right thing to do. You did it just because you felt good at the end. You knew that by helping this person out, effectively, you were helping yourself and made yourself feel great. So don't necessarily be all proud and great about yourself because you think you did the right thing. You only did the right thing if the only reason you did it was for the principle of right or righteousness. So I get a little weird on that one every once in a while.
I love it. I love that, Mike. I do.
So from that, I started to go into it a little more, like what does right mean and all that. And so it's more about objectivity of it all. So being a scientist was kind of where I went. And being a scientist is really about being curious. You think about your 2-year-old is really a scientist. They're really, what's that? What's that? So being curious and not having a judgment about what it is you're asking about. You're just asking and you just try to figure it, you see what it is, which kind of drove me to really focusing on the process of things. So I know we all tend to, want to jump to the outcome. And I used to say this a lot. I have my cover from my iPhone, when you hold it up to someone, they say, well, what color is this? And they'll say, it's black. I said, well, actually, I bought it. It's charcoal gray.
Right.
If you had gone through gathering all the data, gathering all the different things, take the time to go through it all, you might find that it's not exactly what you thought it was. And in today's world in particular, with all the different things in data and stuff, it's really difficult to necessarily know what it is. So when you jump to an outcome, in my opinion, you're almost always going to be wrong. Not because the outcome itself was different, but you missed out on some learning component along the way that had you, no matter what, forced yourself to go through the data, because outcome bias is a very, very real thing. And that's the part that I think people don't give enough respect to, is when they start to try to do things or make decisions about stuff. And that kind of outcome bias is what creates these silos. And people then form the silos and they work in this thing because I know what I'm doing, or, doing right because it's right. I'm a hero. I want to be a hero. Well, had you collaborated on it, hero, you wouldn't have taken you 3 weeks to do it. You would have got it done in 2 days because you could have had a bunch of people help you who knew, this. So all these things kind of come together in the workforce is to, doing these things and taking the time to just flow through it makes everything much, much better. And frankly, easier and almost a better product and higher quality. And in my opinion, that's the kind of the dedication to excellence is really where that all comes from. It's, collaboration is just a challenging thing for a lot of people, not because they don't want to collaborate, but they're not rewarding themselves when they do. And so you try to work that through. And, as a coach of teams or whatever, you kind of see that at times. And that's, again, some of that experience came from that. I coached sports for a little while as well. So
I love those analogies, especially of the cell phone. It's great. What do you say drives you every day? Like, you are a mission-driven human being. And so what is it? What makes you just say, look, I have a job to do in this world?
I just really hung up on connectivity, both as people, again, my collaboration, but also in the space. And there's been such poor architecture and infrastructure over the years that I really love the fact that I'm able to participate in new builds, brand new everything. I'm not the incumbent. I don't look like one of my competitors. I really, truly want to be what people measure excellence in our infrastructure space. I do think I have the greatest team of employees who are spectacular at their jobs. I have the greatest team members in my contractors. I don't even like to call them contractors. They're really, truly partners. We collaborate on everything. I've known most of these partners for decades, so I either worked with them or for them or alongside them, whatever. It's amazing to see what happens when you get everybody in a room and we have a problem, and we have a lot of problems. So building in Chicago is not easy. Between the policies and different entities and railroads and counties and all the stuff that everybody deals with, for whatever reason, this last few years has been the most challenging in all the years that I've done it. And I don't think we could have gotten, just under 400 route miles of network that we have. We couldn't have gotten that done without the team that I have. And I really, truly believe and am thankful that I have these people in my life.
They're great. I have met some of your team leaders as well as, we staff for you as well. And everyone loves your culture. They stay for a very long time. And, everything you're saying today is true. I know you very well, and you really walk your talk. Mike, there are some really exciting things on the horizon. And I want to finish with talking about your growth, new markets that you're expanding into. What does your growth look like over the next 5 years?
We're definitely expanding around the collar states. Within Indiana, it's got some interesting dynamics going on with the different hyperscalers. We're kind of seeing, from Chicagoland based point, kind of a 90-mile ring around Chicago is kind of the area that we're looking at, which gets you into Milwaukee, or just south of Milwaukee, into really Benton Harbor, Grand Rapids, Michigan, all South Bend, all that stuff. So we're looking at a lot of those opportunities to expand. We will look at those from what I call the DBO model, which is design, build, operate. We'll partner with someone of the Fortune 5 hyperscale types and work with them on builds that are, again, unique. I don't want to look like anybody else. I don't want to be along the rail. Frankly, the rails are very dangerous, particularly in the interstates, because if a train derails and your cable gets cut, heaven forbid there's a chemical spill on that run, you won't get to repair that cable for weeks. And, you just can't get back there. And, it's an environmental thing. So those are the dangers that I just don't want to participate in. So I want to make sure that we're building away from all those things, because it just seems like more and more we're having issues around chemical spills and different reasons why you can't get to whatever it is you need to get to. And if you plan for it or plan away from it, you mitigate that risk. And that's really how we think about things. Is I don't want anybody calling me. I want to make sure we all the time and we do the right thing because it's the right thing.
Yes, you do. And Mike, I am just so excited to see you and your team's success. It's well-deserved. How can we reach you? What is your website?
Our website is crosstownfiber.com. Again, it's a fairly simple website at the moment, but it has our maps relatively up to date. But, feel free to reach out anytime.
That's fantastic. And I know that you attend pretty much every conference that there is in your industry and our industry. I see you there. So I know I'm going to be seeing you in a couple weeks at ITW, and I'm sure at many, many more. So I appreciate you coming on the show. This is awesome. It feels so good. Thank you for sharing and just being so authentic.
Thanks for having me, Carrie.
We'll talk soon.
Yep, absolutely.
Thanks for tuning in to Let's Get Digital. This podcast is powered by Broadstaff, a national staffing firm specializing in digital infrastructure talent. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and join me next time as we explore more stories at the intersection of technology, talent, and transformation. Until then, let's get digital.